Okay, the start is not very original. Thanks for inviting me. And am I being recorded? Am I being recorded or not? Yeah. Okay, so I need to keep my tongue in check. Well, there are different versions of this argument. The very long story would be to map the entire evolution of the ways in which ideas of networks have been picked by social movement researchers. The second version would be just to tell you why all these social movement researchers got it wrong in their use of networks, and instead, of course, I got it, and explain to you why I got it right. And the third version, which is what I'm going to talk about, is somewhere in between the two extremes. And I would like to address basically three topics. First, to look quickly at the dominant ways in which ideas, concepts, and metaphors of networks have been used in social movement research. The second idea, the second topic would be to look at how to discuss briefly how to relate network idea to broader conceptions of what a movement is in relation to other forms of collective action. And third, try to identify a possible analytical way of thinking the thinking movements and again in relation to other forms of collective action. And in that third section, I'm going to pick on several ideas that Dimitris put forward this morning, which is very good for me because I don't have to repeat some of the things he said. First, by far the most important explicit use of the idea of network in social movement research, in general, indeed, in the study of collective action, has been the view of networks as channels of activism. This morning in my session we had presentations about that. And the idea is networks are somehow the antecedents, provide the knowledge, the skills, the opportunities, the cognitive and the emotions for people to involve and possibly to remain involved in action. And this view, if we think of the dominant definition of a social movement, which is Charles Tilly, social movements as sustained interactions between challengers and power holders. Now networks belong clearly in what Tilly and Taro in Contentious Politics, in the most recent version of their approach, call movement infrastructures. Namely, in the book Contentious Politics, they draw a distinction between social movement campaigns, which is where the real stuff, real action takes place, and social movements infrastructures, or the complex of organizational resources, ideas, symbols, etc., blah, 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 and, of course, networks that contribute, they make conflictual interaction possible. So networks clearly belong in the realm of antecedents of action. Classic example is my friend Doug McAdams' work on the civil rights movement. And of course there are many more, and you are aware with them anyway. Other way in which networks have been used but not acknowledged as such is networks as pattern ties between organizations. Of course, organizations can interact on a purely random basis. As a matter of fact, this is not the only configuration. Very often, organizations engage in some kind of systematic exchanges. The more these exchanges take patterns, the more these exchanges are repeated over time, the more we can think of networks even in that context. However, there is a little problem, as far as I'm concerned, in social movement analysis. Most of social movement analysts regard this type of interactions, they don't call them networks. It is like a lamp that switches in their head. When you mention networks to social movement analysts, an American one, also many European ones trained in the American studies, say social movement networks, activists. I wrote a book in 1995, Green Networks, which is about networks of organizational ties between environmental organizations. It gets a lot of citation from my American friends. They are only about the single section of a chapter which talks about the fact that networks, the individual activists of the environmental movement are recruited through networks. And it is always something which has really left me frustrated for 20 years of frustration for that now. No, 19. Next year is 20 years. It's really, and of course, a citation is a citation is a citation, as long as the site is wonderful, but sometimes. Anyway, I think this is not just a matter of my problem with them. It's a matter of analytic frames. It's a matter of framing. The idea of the network is the precondition for individual involvement. When it comes to field, to interaction between alliances, they go into the field of strategic alliance, strategic action, and even the recent book by Flickstein and McAdam that very inappropriate, do not cite me. It is a theory of fields. It's actually all about strategic interaction, the logic that different specific actors follow, but they don't look at patterns. However, there have been a number of people, and of course myself, Mary Jane Oza, David Knock, Chris Ansel, Jan van Dat, from different angles. Not all of them would be identified as social movement analysts, but they all look at organization, interactions between organizations. We all done work on organizations representing collective interest, and we all looked at networks in this particular version. More of that kind, more of that sort. Networks are also treated as informal webs of links between individuals. There is a lot of, for example, famous theorizing on social movements, for example, by the late Alberto Melucci, placed a lot of emphasis on the role of informal interpersonal networks, mostly in the domain of personal lifestyle, the creation of the development of personal challenges or forms of hidden resistance against the dominant powers, against dominant cultural models. And there is a lot of network rhetoric and network imagery in that kind of analysis. As far as I'm aware, very little of those ideas have been subject to systematic empirical tests from a point of view of network analysis. Even more generally, relevant to our understanding of collective actions are all those views that place the emphasis on the role that individuals, because of their commitment, because of their skills, because of their status, etc., that individuals can play within the political process. And this is being, again, approached from very different angles. There is being now a lot of work, for example, by anthropologist Jeff Juris on networks of radical activism, especially in the context of global justice or global justice movements or similar phenomena. There has been, of course, a lot of work emphasizing the opening of spaces for individuals to act regardless of their organizational ties by people like Castells, Bennett, and Segerberg, and of course with the wonderful and meaningless word, the logic connective action, which sounds great and fantastic. I don't like it, as you may have guessed, but anyway. Anyway, there has been a lot of work on the role of individuals, and this is the result of the going theorizing on individualization of society. We are very much aware of with these ideas. And finally, the idea that individuals with specific interests, skills, competences can play a role also reflects in other types of line of theorizing. For example, the role of communities of practice or epistemic communities as carriers of cultural innovation, as carriers of political change, can also be taken into account from this angle. Again, very often little social network analysis involved in this analysis. There are other aspects, but as I say, time flies, so we can... Oh no, there is one point is important. Another issue where networks are important is in the context of space. Again, a lot of network image there. Sometimes people like Roger Gould or Peter Edstrom have done in very important analysis mapping flows and of people, flows of ties between territories. Roger Gould on the Paris Commune, Peter Edström on the diffusion of, for example, of Social Democratic Party in Sweden across regions. Other times this is done on a more qualitative way by critical geographers, for example, Paul Routledge. Yet again, largely uncharted is, however, the idea of network that networks may not involve only individuals or organizations. They may also involve events or representation. We heard about that extensively here, but there is much more that should be done, and definitely relatively little has been done so far from a two-mode logic of analysis in the field of the analysis of collective action. So we have quite, in 10 minutes, we have dealt with all the history of research in this field. It seems to me that there is clear awareness that if we look at if we want to take a proper view of collective action processes, we need to take all these different dimensions into account somehow in a kind of coherent form. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that the awareness does not always correspond to the practice. Not because we are lazy, but because there is an objective difficulty, if anything else, in getting the data, but also in thinking about how to connect different layers of experience. Think of research. The most frequent and the best examples of research in collective action are either focused on the individuals, studies like of specific, there is a very important project going on right now coordinated by Bert Klandermans and Stefan Wallgrav on participants in demonstrations across different European countries. And of course there are analyses based on traditional cross-sectional national surveys. Or otherwise, other times the focus is on organizations. Plenty of work on that level. Yet other times, here I mention events because that's what I'm going to talk about. We could talk about, there are analyses focusing on events. Protest event analysis introduced by Charles Tilley and developed Sidney Taro, Ruud Koopmans, Dieter Rucht in Europe is one example of the kind. And each of these analyses is sensitive to a network and relational imagery. Each of these analyses collects information about connections, but not necessarily maps them together in a coherent way, or in none of these levels really focus on the network element as its fundamental point. Now, as I said, I'm going to focus on these three levels: individuals, organizations, events. And I'm going to suggest that to move from a two-mode, which is as far as we go usually in this type of analysis, to a three-mode logic. Three-mode logic you have heard this morning, so I don't have to. If you missed Dimitri's presentation, it's your fault, not mine. So you will be left in the darkness. And however, why I think this type of move in this particular case is useful? I think it's useful because it can, hopefully, it can help us to take a fundamental step, namely to move from the idea of collective action processes and in particular movements as aggregates of actors to an idea of fields. Even now, when we talk about fields, very often the analyses we bumped into are basically analyses of description of the actors in the fields. Sometimes there are qualitative descriptions of the logic with which a very selected sample of actors in the field operate. For example, Elizabeth Armstrong analysis of gay and lesbian activism in the US. Other times you have, if you look at the broader picture, very often you get into descriptions of the population. Very often, all too often, we take movements as the aggregates of individuals with certain views, ideas, or movements as aggregates of organization. We decide what an environmental organization is, and then we say, okay, these are the environmental organization. We calculate a little bit of means and percentages, and we say that's the profile of the movement. It doesn't always work that way, however, in practical terms. as I'm here to promote myself, frankly. I got a book coming out at Cambridge. When it comes out, God knows, because Cambridge is not very fast. But anyway, it will come out. And I basically an analysis of civil society in Glasgow and Bristol, civil society organizations, not very exciting in itself. But the interesting thing is if you look at the distribution of the properties of the organizations in the two cities, they are exactly the same. The way they relate to each other and the way in which organizations with different characteristics link to each other or do not link to each other is totally different in the two cases. Okay. Just please buy the book when it comes out. I won't say you more about that. But looking at different types of modes, different modes, also is a way to enables us to link and to recognize the fact that within our collective action fields, the actors that promote collective goods and cooperate can actually follow different logics. I call them modes of coordination, defined by different ways, in particular in which resource allocations are taken and boundaries of solidarity are defined. And I will illustrate you in what follows, 10 minutes, in the next 10 minutes, by looking at starting from this very simple tripartite structure: individuals, organizations, and events. Let's start from a. Well, that's very nice. That was not in the plan. Okay, so yes, there's nothing to do with. Okay, don't close your eyes or you get a sickness. But that's what gives me. I feel dizzy. I'm going to. Okay, let's think a very basic pattern. Very often, it happens that in the collective action is really promoted within the boundaries of specific organizations. And the most elementary network pattern is a pattern in which you have individuals. The red ones are individuals. Then we have political organization, PO1, PO2, PO3 in the middle. And then you have events. What happens? People with certain interests, demands, persuasions join one organization. These ones here join 3, are members of P1, and 4 is member of PO2, etc. Organizations promote events pursuing those interests. And there is indifference between the different organizations, not because, and this is actually a classic pattern. Very often when you have an interest, there is an organization representing it, you go to that organization and you get this organization to promote events, or they are already promoting events. You don't play, as a citizen individual, you don't play an active role in promoting the event. And if you think this applies to very different broad range of empirical situations, it applies on the one hand to a classic pluralist model in which the individuals are members of one organization not because they are hostile to the other, but because they are indifferent to the other. Namely, membership in one organization doesn't imply any commitment, positive or negative, in relation to other organizations pursuing different interests. The important thing is there's a purely atomized and segmented pattern of action. The other extreme case where this pattern applies is totally different, is the situation of totally sectarian groups that are positively hostile to each other, and therefore in which the membership of the individuals is by definition exclusive, mutually exclusive. But the important thing is that the relational pattern is a pattern which connects individuals actors. So the coordination of resource exchanges takes only place within one layer. And when it comes to the definition of boundaries, if you think boundaries can be defined in many different ways, and I offer a very simplistic, for the sake of illustration, I only focus on the fact that following a Zimmelian kind of argument, individuals define boundaries of collectivities through their memberships. Following this logic, hoping that, yes. Okay, here what we have boundaries which are defined by the fact that the individuals up there are members of organization 1 and the two guys at the bottom are members of organization 3, and this is where the solidarities are concentrated. Namely, the boundary, the other ties reflect the connection that exists between individuals or members of the same group. And of course, this is not only a basic pattern. Then what happens very often? Very often, collective action is promoted through coalitions. Analytically, a coalition does not require a shift in the identities of the actors involved. I may be an extreme right winger, you may be an extreme left winger. We are both concerned because they are building a road in our neighborhood. We mobilize to oppose it. Once the specific campaign is over, we part company. The analytic logical coalition does not imply solidarities. I'm not implying that coalitions may evolve into something different, but the logic of the coalition per se does not require. Okay, what happens in this situation? In this situation, we have organizations promoting events, but organizations, perhaps two organizations, PO2 and PO3, may promote one event, event number 3. They may join in campaigns, and or they can talk to each other to exchange information, exchange resources, etc. The individuals became attached to their specific group, but the groups may collaborate. This is a second pattern. Boundary definition is not affected, but there are negotiations, at least at the level of organization, regarding the allocation of resources. Third case, and this is the most tricky, the most confused, ambiguous, but also the most interesting in many ways. Very often what I call communitarian/subculture, which reflects my mental confusion. I would have picked one word otherwise. But the idea is collective action very often takes place without organization, because organizations do not want act. Or sometimes we could even, I took a PO, the organization number 2 out of the picture, because the organizations may not exist. Or they may be prevented from acting, from establishing alliances by repressive regimes. So, what happens is that sometimes a collective action can be promoted by individuals that perhaps know each other through the fact of being involved in activities, but they may also promote events individually. I go to the same PTA, Parent Teachers Association. I know other people. It's not the PTA per se that promotes the campaign, but I can promote a campaign using the ties that have been created in that context. Or there may be, it's not easy to see, but anyway, the organization up here is a non-political organization. Could be a church. A church can promote an event, which is non-political officially, but it is political in the substance. Or we can be in the Basque country, which is probably most. It can be a culinary association. Cooking association is not. It's probably better than going to church or having a nice meal, but I don't want to offend any religious sensibility. But anyway, the culinary association is not a joke. I mean, in the Basque country, culinary associations were one of the strongholds of ETA when Franco was around. Now they go to restaurants, but when Franco was around, they would meet there. And I went recently at a meeting, a few years ago, at a meeting of one of these culinary associations with a local friend. And all the guys there, 40 people, they were all former members of ETA. Don't tell the police. No. Anyway, that was the context. So and this is, if you think, for example, what happened and this type of connection can be connections in real life. The bazaar, the mosque, or the neighborhood that theorists like Bayat talk about when they look at the Middle East. Or it can be even internet-created connection. Facebook pages sometimes. I'm not denying the role of them. But it's another pattern. It's a pattern that organizations do not play this filtering role. And the connections is created mostly by what individuals do. And individuals may know each other through groups, but they may also play an independent role. And then finally, what we really care about. Okay, these are, the boundaries. This is simply the identification of new boundaries that originate from the previous tie. For example, these two, okay. I don't have a pointer because my pointer collapsed. years ago. Anyway, these two individuals here are members of the same non-political group, and therefore, to some extent, this create a boundary between them. Oops. Oh, what's that? You know, I'm not familiar with Prezi, and I can see why I'm not familiar with Prezi. Oh, this is the what we are really interested in, the real social movement. The real social movement is a multi-level, is conceptualized as a multi-level experience. Now, in which, and this is what I think, in terms of analytics, creates, determines the peculiarity of a movement dynamic in relation to other forms of collective action. The multiplicity of the levels involved, the fact that a social movement process creates spaces in which actors can act both as individuals and as organizations, in which, and by acting, they establish and they strengthen connections. The idea, I think this is very important. A social movement does not exist because people protest in one place, in another place, or in the third or a fourth place. You can speak at a social movement because the guys who mobilize in place one recognize something in common with the guys that are mobilizing in place 2 or in place 3, and are capable of establishing connections between. They are able to establish connections between organizations, and organizations are capable of establishing connections between events. That is what is the implication of this logic? The implication of this logic is that you cannot study social movements proper only by looking at counting protest event reports from the press. You need to ask questions about the level of connectivity which you may find among those elements, between elements. And in order to do, and of course it is incredibly difficult to capture the data for that. An ideal design for this type of study requires a study or a survey of organizations, the relevant organizations in a given field, the mapping of the events that they are promoting, a mapping of the individuals active, both as members of organizations, but ideally also outside organizational membership in the same area, and the level of involvement of these individuals in both organizations and events. Okay? It's complicated. I accept that. But at that level, you can start seeing ways to capture the fact that ultimately, when we talk about collective action, we are really talking, and social movement dynamics in particular, we're really talking about multi-level phenomena. You take one of the elements out of the picture, you get still useful findings, you get still meaningful findings, but somehow you're missing out on other aspects of the process. And of course, we inevitably miss out on some parts of the analysis, in the analysis we do of reality, so that's not a big deal in itself, but I think at least this type of, what I've tried to illustrate, is a kind of logic that really takes the idea of the network out of the, I think, limitative role which has been assigned to it by traditional social movement analysis and places it in a broader perspective. Networks are not just preconditions which explain why you act and I do not act. Because my mom doesn't want to, and she pressurizes me, and that's why I do not act. But that's interesting. But it's not the entire story. The entire story, networks are also a reflection of the way in which individuals, organizations, etc., by participating in events, by being engaged in memberships, create a form of social organization which is not necessarily formalized in bureaucratic terms, but which still a recurrent, relatively pattern, at least for limited periods of time. Things come and go, that's obvious. But for relatively short, limited period of time, it's still a type of formal organization that is not just based on random interactions, it's meaningful, and it's something that people can refer to in pursuing their causes. Thank you.
1, 2. Yep. Thank you, Mario. Thanks a lot. Also for a little bit explaining what Dimitris was meaning in his first talk, because he was kind of skipping those pieces to get to maybe more complexity.
That's not very nice.
And basically I would mention that this is similar to what we're trying, or at least planning to do, for objects, individuals, and concepts in our kind of analysis of communities. We do creative communities in this case. So please, questions, comments, I think there must be some.
Thanks for the presentation. So interesting variant of presentation. And the question about 3 level, what to talk about. So if organization is, as I think it's a structural level, structural problem, and events is process. So what is hiding on individuals level? Is it cultural problems or ideas, trust?
Very good question, but I was, which exposes the fact that I was totally unclear. For me, organizations is not. I don't see there is a contrast between process and structure. Structure is a process. Is simply a process which is reproduced, which takes different forms, and therefore, for example, from would you say organization can be regarded in itself as a network, because if you think at one level you can take the organization as the network consisted of interaction between people who are somehow identifiably linked to that organization. An organization is a more formalized way of defining the boundaries of a network, but from my perspective, it is still a process, which doesn't. So I'm not playing with the contrast between, say, structure and agency, or process and structure. I think it's better. The best way to look at this approach, at least from my point of view, is to look at it as an attempt to map the process, which involves different layers of human experience.
So for you, all of these individuals, organizations, event, it's structure. All of this. You can
use a structural logic to look at these different the interdependence of these different elements. Yeah, no, but listen, it depends. Structure can we usually regard as something which is more permanent than others, and the issue there is precisely one of the issues. It's certainly true that one single organization is much more permanent than a movement as a whole. Okay. Partially, the misunderstanding, the difficulty to interact is that in sociology, in social science, the organization is used in 2 ways. It's used to define, to identify a specific bounded and coordinated set of actors with a clear identity, etc. Is also used to identify a principle through which elements of a system are structured. So this is a source of clear misunderstanding. I would suggest there is a clear difference. The question is the cost. The difference between, for example, an organization and an organizational dynamic and the social movement dynamic is that in a formal organization you have usually you will have clearer rules defining who is a member, who is not. Not always. There are intermediate situations, and you will have clearer rules regarding the mechanism of decision making regarding the allocation of resources. In its pure form, a social movement dynamic is very much the everyday and endless meeting. There is this book by Francesca Poletta, Democracy is an Endless Meeting, and actually this applies to organizations or to social movements in general as well. There is no criteria. The idea, the pure model of social movement, the social movement is in which all the actors involved negotiate take decisions, and on a regular basis. And in a way, I sometimes use for movements the metaphor that Ernest Renan used for nations. Renan said that nations is a daily plebiscite. Namely, the nation exists because the citizens, the members of the nation, reproduce it every day, decide through their behavior, their ideas, etc., to reinforce this feeling. And I think movements are very much in the same line.
Thank you a lot. Yeah.
Mario, thanks for your presentation. So as far as I know, the two-mode networks consider two types of nodes. And we can analyze, or we have connections only between first type node and the second type node. And there is no connections between inside of type. As you show us the network of three-mode networks with three different type of nodes, individuals, organizations, and events. And I see the connections between not only among individuals, organizations, and events, but between individuals and organizations, individuals and events and organizations. And my question is, what is a link between, for example, organizations? The link appears when organizations intersecting in member list, or for example when two organizations is a part of organized committee of some event like St. Petersburg State University and the Center for German and European Studies organized this conference. So when appear links between different node types?
Well, I mean, you answered your question. You got it. So the short answer is yes. That's exactly what happens. I mean, you can think, for example, the links. You need to think of links between organizations at different levels. One, there are direct links on a one-mode logic. Then there are links that occur via the involvement of organizations in events. But also you may think of the fact that, for example, by participating in promoting certain events, organizations get in touch with the population of activists or sympathizers that goes beyond the boundary of people who are already members of the organization itself, but actually are simply those who are interested in the event and therefore become somehow coming into touch with the organization. So there is this type of logic. Basically, you could use this type of logic to build, for example, a neighbor for each organization, a neighbor consisting of the potential individual sympathizer or potential activists for an organization, which does not consist only on the people who are already connected, but on the people who participate in the events that are already that these organizations promotes or participates in, and this, I think, brings you one step further in your understanding of the dynamics.
Can I start just tying in?
No, okay.
Just for a 10-second report, that is, you could look at different types of agency and different types of types. Yeah. So you're actually having to actually aggregate all that into a two-mode that every agent is the same type, or every, in other words, that every type of agency is the same type, and every type of type is the same type.
It is too complicated to analyze such complex networks.
Not that complicated, as long as you make some deductive assumptions. You just need to make a deductive assumption. Of course, organizations might link to one another, but it's a different type of type to the way that agents link. So that's...
Okay, thanks.
Wait, no, they won't hear you. You need... No, she was, Nikita, she was, she had
Yeah, I'm trying to grasp your main message. So far as I understand, you are saying that network analysis in social movements is insufficient, and that it should be sort of broadened and reintroduced. I'm thinking when you are trying to promote, not you, but anyone is trying to promote some particular method, it might be frustrating because every method has its limitations. And then perhaps we just find that maybe there have been tasks that won't need a lot of social network analysis, or particularly three-mode network analysis. I'm finding very interesting what you said of culinary stuff. We're also finding that, for example, those AIDS denialists online, those people who deny AIDS and urge other people to refuse from medicine, intersect with ultra-right nationalists. And for that, we don't need 3 modes. We need only 2 modes: web pages and members. That's all. So we've solved our task, or maybe we can even do it without any network analysis at all, but do some regular statistics to find out this. So, just could you clarify your main message?
Just to clarify, I'm Mario Diani. I'm not a JC or Buddha. I'm not announcing the palingenetic transformation of social science. We can certainly keep standard quantitative analysis, and most of the times it will be fine, absolutely fine. And it's certainly true that we don't need. I don't say by any means that we must do that. I'm simply saying we could do this as well as other things. And in the context of network imagery, my point is that I think what is limited among most, I mean, no, it's not limited, among most, in the research practice of most, and in the theorizing of most so-called social movement analysts now, the concept of network comes in only from the point of view, primarily from the point of view of individual recruitment. I think they are missing the area of interorganizational relation is left mostly to the idea, to the realm of strategic interaction. And being unfair is not all of them, of course. But for the sake of simplicity, I still think it's fair to say that the large majority of people doing social movement research, when they think of net, I've been failing to have conversations, on meaningful conversations with people with whom I work for or met dozens of conferences. Okay, maybe because I'm totally confusing and ambiguous and I know I can't make it myself clear. But I think there is a much deeper issue here in relation to the role that the idea of network has historically played in social movement analysis. That was my only point regarding social movement analysis. Regarding the rest, I think one of the big challenges is we don't need, you say, you need individuals and websites, fine. I think I would want to see what these guys do out in the end, so that the events and the action would come in. For example, Castell says not only Castell, the Facebook, the Egyptian uprising was a Twitter revolution. Okay, but even in that case, you have individuals dealing on Facebook, and then every now and again they happen to go out in the streets. The only problem that in the streets there were also other types of guys, the military and also later on the Muslim brothers that went to the villages, face-to-face interactions, and then, oh, surprise, they win the elections. I mean, and then the Facebook people clap after later they clap the military, you come in. Fantastic. I mean, it's like Allende's brother-in-law clapping Pinochet in 1973 in Chile for restoring order. I mean.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we can afford one more question, a comment.
Yes, thanks. Could you please say a little bit more? Did you have a look on the role of the events in the production of activists and maybe organizations?
Yeah, very good question. The reason to look at events is that, especially very often there are events which are for any sort of reason emotionally charged, which are symbolically meaningful, and which provide a reference point in context in which, for one reason or the other, organizations are not so active or are not able to act or are not willing to act for all sorts of reasons. And I can think of a number of examples. In terms of dictatorship, some of the biggest statements and ways to revitalize individuals. Some of the biggest statements about Catalan or Basque independence were religious events. The funeral of the abbot of Montserrat back, the late 60s or 80s, was a big because the Abbey of Montserrat in Catalonia was a stronghold of Catalan culture during Franco times. Other events of the sort we can think easily. For example, the White March in Belgium. I may be wrong. My Belgian friends in the audience, they may be. The White March after the pedophile case back in the mid-1990s, came at a time of strong distrust towards the political system. So it was something which was generated, not in which organizations reportedly didn't play such a major role, but it still was an important point for many people who were really willing to act, to re-establish ties and to get involved. So yes, I think events have the important thing is by looking at events, we acknowledge the fact that there is also important components of collective action processes which don't have an agentic capacity in the traditional way we conceive it, and still are carriers of meanings and symbols, and still are carry consequences for the political process. And this is a very rough attempt, but it's a way to play with this multiplexity of levels and try to bring them together in something which is hopefully meaningful.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. I think we should thank you once again.
Thank you.